at last, after months of conjecture on cancellation, here it is. Disney's Snow White has officially hit the theaters the last 2 weeks before a film's release, especially as one as controversial as Snow White always seems the quietest. It's like the calm before a storm, and it turned out to be just as bad as everyone was expecting. The first is an ode to the original animation, something that many people felt very strongly about with this movie, considering the original Snow White was one of the most significant films in history. It's a horrible mix of dubious direction, poor costume design, and just awkward writing. This all became clear as soon as the first song started playing. It's what defines Disney now and helps her to defeat evil by her compassion. Now, this modern version is just Disney's modern retelling of a headstrong girl destined to lead her kingdom, and this is probably the toned-down version considering all the backlash the movie has received over the last 2 years. Unfortunately, neither story is told very well in this movie. Deeper messaging appealing to everyone for generations is also present in this movie. This is mostly due to how Snow White's character seems to change for the first third of the movie. Now, it's easy to identify which sections of the movie are initial footage and which are just reshoots. Rachel Zegler shockingly seems sweet and naive, reminiscent of the original cartoon, and everything Rachel Zegler seemed to be against in interviews for the movie, yet here she is, cleaning the castle, singing to herself, and worrying about what's happening in a kingdom she doesn't know much about. And she maintains this personality up until she leaves the dwarf's cottage. Her personality starts to change, though, when she is meandering the forest and runs across her love interest for the second time. Based on the actor's original interviews, she is far more stubborn and outspoken while still sheltered, just as people were projecting Snow White would be based on. She also doesn't seem to value how her love interest is framing her. The two sides of her personality seem to be at war until the last confrontation with the evil queen. Then she's back to be a sweet, naive girl happily dancing away through the kingdom. Unfortunately, Snow White's contradictory demeanor is only the tip of the iceberg. Overall, the film feels as though most viewers were trying too much in too short of a time span. As a result, some parts of the movie are quite obviously missing. For example, at one point, Snow White mentions the name of a character we are never actually introduced to. She then tries to hide this by panning over to the character in question. Though the scene in issue is used to drive romance, it still feels out of place, since Snow White's love interest, Jonathan, is not really called for. You see, Jonathan abruptly grabs an arrow for her after first fiercely criticizing her and lecturing her about her privilege. Naturally, this is often the case with Disney romance stories, but bearing in mind that up until now the two have known each other for just 2 days at most now, Snow White and Jonathan just seem to have almost none. It's just entirely forced in for the script. Though the film does insist that these two are madly in love with each other. They are so in love with one another, in fact, that it is sufficient to break the curse the evil queen places on Snow White. Their whole romance is just too hurried to ever feel meaningful, though, and it just ends up feeling flat. There is no depth, no fresh angle between the characters. They just end up together unexpectedly. There is no suspense. Speaking of convenience, that's the only thing that can be used to characterize the climax of this movie. Snow White faces no actual challenges at the end like she's supposed to. Despite saying that defeating the evil queen won't be easy, her victory just sort of lazily curves itself around her hand. Without her saying anything, the people, who claimed they forgot what she looks like, suddenly identify Snow White and gather behind her. She really just walks into town and removes her hood. She just suddenly shows up in a brilliant red hood. The people are like, yes, this is the princess. There is no rousing speech or sneaky around to get close to the queen. And together they suddenly stroll to the castle. The queen will gladly come outside to face, but she won't even seem surprised that Snow White is even alive. She simply conjures up a dagger and orders her to kill her. Snow White, however, doesn't move. This is as far as Snow White's plan goes. She seems unsure of what to do now she is in front of the queen, and you would have thought she would have few more steps to topple the evil queen than gather a group of people and demand the castle back. Luckily, the queen orders her guards to kill Snow White, so setting up that these soldiers have been hunting the princess to kill her most of the film. Still, we never really see these soldiers outside of the scene and the queen's musical number. The audience is not given any cause to ever give them any thought. The only thing the film truly cares about is trying to prove Snow White's kindness. Hence, she should lead based on this reason. Remembering their names helps her to show her compassion to these soldiers. For some reason, this is just enough for the troops to turn their backs on the evil queen and abruptly gather behind Snow White. Yet nobody even knows her name. She simply remembers their names. She has not done anything to show them she will be less of a despot than the evil queen. If we had seen the queen not bothering to call people by their names, this could have been more important, but even that would be stretching things. Thus, you would think at this point the evil queen would start doing a bit more magic. The film seems to show that she is a strong sorceress at the beginning. Surely there must be more to her magic than her withering roses and poisoned apples. Just anything, even some more aura. Gal Gadot doesn't even seem to care about being this terrible witch. The only thing that truly seems evil is that she attempts to stab Snow White, but sadly for her the dagger is shot out of her hand and somehow renders her powerless. Suddenly her priority when being overthrown is to check to see if she is the most powerful woman in the land. Thus the queen is then let run back into the castle and back to her mirror. Apparently this is the most important thing she can do when she is overthrown. The mirror says no next. The queen breaks it right as Snow White walks into the room for some inexplicable reason. She shatters and is drawn into an otherworldly dimension behind the magic mirror, then reforms once the deed is finished. The main question is why any of this was greenlit in the first place, but this is far from the worst thing about the movie. That honor goes to the huntsman in the original cartoon, bone-chilling enough to give any child nightmares. You have no idea really what's even going on. Though he had little role in the narrative, he was a very memorable character that gave the film great complexity, but the 2025 rendition of the character just lacks a flame to the original. He's the least terrifying thing in the entire movie, and it doesn't help that he just pulls it out and stiffly points it at her, moving closer with every perplexed why she throws at him. Zelda's Snow White merely stands in one spot and lets him advance on her. She could have easily walked away from the huntsman and his poorly held knife, but she doesn't even seem to be remotely terrified of he. He seems to be fixed in place, not moving except his mouth as he tells her to dash into the forest. Although the actor's actual direction is difficult to discern, their execution was appalling. He is standing in the middle of a room at one point close to the end of the film, but the actor simply seems so incredibly stiff that your eyes instantly go to him. He looks like a poorly animated NPC, and it just looks horrible. Not even Gal Gadot, who's been regularly called wooden, was that bad. But with all that said, Snow White wasn't just a complete train wreck. Most notably, or even shockingly, Rachel Zegler's singing was good. While the same cannot really be said for Gal Gadot, the songs she sang clearly matched Disney princesses in general, so supporting the claim that she was selected for the part because she could actually sing, she still had some decent times. Though unfortunately, that's kind of it about the movie. It's just a boring, bland mess. Her prostheses for the old hag were very well done and seemed worth your full hours in makeup since they gave some level of realism to the film that would have been totally lost if Disney just tried to CGI the old hag look. Its storyline was complex at the best of times, and it is simply rife with holes at worst. Everybody will move on from and never even consider this film in the future, but at least Disney at last released this following 2 years of just terrible hype. Even the last 2 weeks before the movie came out were utterly dead. Nobody even bothered to discuss it anymore. While everyone held their breath in expectation of a disaster, it was like the calm before the storm. But with Snow White, this was not the case. Rather, the debate only seemed to get more heated, and naturally their lead actress was right in the thick of it. Disney seemed to be doing everything to keep her main actresses apart as Snow White's release date drew near. Gal Gadot did fluffy interviews for several media sources. Rachel Zegler was on tour singing in nations without English-speaking people. The two expressed different political views, which led to the separation. People could only conjecture about what was truly happening behind closed doors. But without means to validate those rumors, people focused on Zegler and her solo travel schedule. She was very rarely interviewed, thus there wasn't much coverage around her appearances. This would not be surprising given the past interviews she did and how poorly this affected the film's reception, but it was still strange. Given hundreds of millions of people watching this film, why was the lead actress not questioned about it? She said in an interview with Vogue Mexico that it was an honor to be involved in something that people felt so passionate about, but nobody paid attention to this following her past interviews, since it seemed like a frantic attempt to appease those who might have threatened to boycott the film. Disney knew that there was only so long it could avoid having Gadot and Zegler in the same room, thus it did nothing to prevent the mounting controversy. Like Disney's attempts to keep the actresses away from each other, this was ineffective. But instead of gathering them for an interview, the studio aired just how bad things were at the Oscars, I guess. You might as well tank a movie in style during the evening if you intend to do so. People could tell right away that something was strange when Gaylord and Zegler presented an award. Usually when celebrities appear together, they banter to get the audience laughing. There is some natural chemistry, but with them there was absolutely no chemistry. Disney could not even compel it. They seemed to ignore each other with courteous smiles on their faces from the time they walked on stage. They wouldn't even glance at each other. They read from the teleprompter and fixed their eyes squarely at the camera. They were convincing everyone that these two people couldn't stand each other, as though they were deliberately avoiding each other even on the same stage. They just pretended the other one didn't exist until they could get off the stage and sigh a breath of relief. They weren't even playfully pretending to hate each other either, which would have saved any rumors about disliking each other. The fact that they were presenting the award for Best Visual Effects out of all the possible categories made the whole thing much better. Snow White is the lead of the CGI hodgepodge selected for this. Whoever made that choice is either paid off by Disney or naive. Of course, every media outlet in existence is there taking pictures and interviewing. The guest lists are always star-studded and everyone who can wants a chance to walk the red carpet. Of course, Disney has canceled and scaled back the Snow White premiere events along with all the hate online, which is really crazy considering that Disney premiere events have always been massive events. The guest lists are always star-studded. But soon after this Oscar disaster, the studio changed its strategy with Snow White. There was a red carpet, but Disney's guests were asked less questions than usual since Disney limited coverage to photographers in a house crew. Since keeping her from saying anything, the Los Angeles premiere wasn't the only one impacted. What better way to stop your lead from killing your movie? But if that's not a sign that Disney has zero faith in the film's success, then I don't know what is. But impressively, Snow White's premiere was not only the smallest Disney has hosted in years, one was only downscaled. The one meant to be held in London was just canceled totally the last time a studio scaled down their own premiere so drastically. It has also had the worst numbers for advanced tickets. Disney and other studios release a movie and they start selling tickets at least 1 month in advance because of the buzz around these movies. The opening weekend showings sell out in hours. You kind of need these massive $100 million budgets, else the movie will simply flunk. However, this time the studio opened advance ticket sales only 2 weeks before the film's release. Especially for a movie the studio once considered to be a guaranteed hit, this was almost unheard of. It's literally Disney's most well-known movie from the past and the one that brought Disney as successful as it is today. Even more unusual, though, is how slowly they were selling the tickets. The theaters were filling up over ages. After a few days, smaller theaters were hardly packed. In the rather large ones, well, the numbers were just plain embarrassing. Snow White's expected earnings a month ago ranged from $65 to $68 million. Those figures dropped to an estimated $48 to $58 million, though as ticket sales have failed to pick momentum. This is on par with what the Marvels produced over opening weekend. Studies have aimed to blame the low age of the original film. Presumably younger viewers would not be familiar with Snow White since the movie was first released in 1937. But, especially when you actually see the movie, this just seems like a very thin justification. Disney would try to do everything they could to change the story since the company knew they had to act drastically to turn this movie around and at last recover the financial loss the film was destined to have. After 2 years of debate and people relentlessly attacking Snow White, it seemed as though none of any media outlet had anything negative to say about her. Disney had apparently won the fight. Variety even referred to it as a visual feast, and one reviewer claimed it to be the best live-action adaptation in years. Fans even went so far as to say this would be their preferred live-action remaking. All of this onslaught of positivity came out of nowhere and seemed illegible. Disney remembered how to create these tales, almost as though she were in a parallel universe. Unfortunately for Disney, though, they were unable to control the narrative for very long since people soon realized that positivity was limited to the few outlets they had invited to the premiere. On March 16, 2025, writers at that park reported a very intriguing discovery that seemed The Hollywood Reporter had subtly tried to edit one of their pieces. According to The Hollywood Reporter, Mark Webb, the director of the film, had always intended to use CGI dwarfs. Thus, the article and issue referenced Snow White and the CGI dwarfs and how they came to be such an odd thing to do that managed to take away the spotlight from Rachel Zegler. This was not only an odd attempt to make Snow White critics seem illogical, but also a clear lie, like they were hoping people were too dumb to see the change. Disney and all these other media companies would go this slow to try and change the narrative, which is not something you do when you're confident in the movie, but all bets were off and Snow White never stood a chance as someone had actually downloaded the original article as a PDF and immediately brought attention to that parking place. Disney had destroyed its reputation, and the film was a new low both for the studio and for cultural desecration, according to The Independent. The HuffPost called it a weird hot mess, and the Times said it was lazy and visually repulsive. Particularly scathing, Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian described it as an exhaustively terrible project with a tiring, pseudo-progressive approach that felt hollow, with everyone basically arriving at the same conclusion: avoid seeing this movie. CBS News even claimed Snow White is squarely in the pantheon of movies that undermine our society just by existing. This entire movie has been nothing except one issue after another for Disney, and a last wake-up call from which none of their BS will be accepted by viewers going forward.